Spacefarer. What the UFO? I'm speaking with Matt Laslo today. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So excited to talk to you, man. If you're in the UAP community, you've probably been watching Matt's work. He's been responsible for getting us great information from DC, from the mouths of elected representatives who otherwise don't get asked these questions. So you're playing a super important role, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I was going to say, don't lie to your audience. I don't know if great information is what I provide. I do interview 535 liars for a living, but I do bring you information.
Whatever they say, even if it's of dubious value. I'm going to read what AI says about you, and you can fact check it in case it's hallucinating. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I used to be a drug reporter for Playboy, Rolling Stone, Vice, so I might be hallucinating too. So maybe AI is more right than I am.
Yeah, I think Occam's razor based on your CV is that you are a cool person because you have worked for a lot of cool publications and asked cool questions over the years. AI says, since 2006, you've been reporting on federal policy, campaigns, and the inner workings of Congress. You founded Laslo Congressional Bureau, and you provide in-depth political coverage to over 65 local NPR stations and various national outlets. In 2023, you launched AskaPol, which is a pioneering platform that empowers citizens to pose direct questions to their elected officials, fostering greater transparency in government. Matt's investigative reporting has been featured in prominent publications such as Wired, Rolling Stone, Playboy, Vice News, and The Daily Beast, covering topics ranging from data privacy and big tech to unidentified aerial phenomena and, as you mentioned, drugs. Beyond journalism, you impart your expertise as a political communications professor at institutions including Johns Hopkins University, Boston University, and the University of Maryland. Did it get things mostly right?
Mostly right, except for after Trump won in 2016, I took my name out of my bureau. So now instead of the Laslo Congressional Bureau, it's the LCB.
Oh, okay.
After the 2022 midterms, when CNN lost like 25% of their viewership, What did they change? Nothing. Not a single thing. And that is the problem with us arrogant bleeps. Us in the media are the problem, which is where AskaPole came about. Because I'm like, everyone's frustration, right, left, and center is valid. I want to bring you guys inside the Capitol with me to show you it's actually worse than you think, especially for those who are tribalists. If you're Republican or Democrat, I'm like, no. Like both parties these days have just perfected selling fear. They don't have many answers, but wow, do they sell doom. So yeah, that's my only amendment to AI.
Pretty cool niche you've carved out for yourself, man. And this AskaPole ideas are like very innovative and exciting and cool. I want to tell anybody listening, I just subscribed. I signed up. I paid the money. I recommend that people do. If you're going to only subscribe to one place where you pay somebody money, pick Matt before you pick me, because AskaPole is it's like doing God's work for UAP, but also not just UAP. Like this cool idea you have is that you're going to be like a direct pipeline. You are a direct pipeline between people's questions and their elected representatives. And often the only other recourse they have is like sending an email, and they get back a like 18th level staffer going, thank you for your interest in science. Our congressman is committed to science. We will now send you emails forever. So it's really, really useful to have you out there, like cornering him in the hallway and being like, what's going on with this? Even if they can only spit out 27 seconds for you.
Yeah.
That's really dope. And it's like a cool, innovative model.
And that's where it's also like a little bit selfish on my end. Because why? In this contemporary Congress or Washington right now, it's all Republicans. And like, who am I? I'm the media. So I'm the enemy, blah, blah, blah. When I come to politicians, whether it's former Secretary of State Marco Rubio or Marjorie Taylor Greene, like they know me, they like me enough. So they'll answer my questions. But when I come with your questions, there's a power that you guys have. I know it doesn't feel like you have it if you're, just one voter out of, hundreds of millions. But oh my gosh, when I say, hey, one of your constituents sent me this question, lawmakers just change. And there's just a beauty to that, which is why, I'm using you all. Hopefully you can use our information. And we do have paid tiers, but we also have free. All of our audio is always free. And yeah, C-SPAN trained me well. We don't want to, these are your lawmakers. We're not going to put a paywall up on that. We just paywall transcripts for a week and then they go free. Shh, don't tell people that.
No, that's a really smart business model, man. And this is a time where the media landscape's changing so much. You need that kind of creativity to stay afloat. So let's just make sure to direct people exactly where they should go. I found you on Substack. Is that where you like people to sign up?
Yeah. So our Substack is AskaPole.com, but you can just go to AskaPoleUAPs.com to find us. And then we're all over the social media and all that BS.
And this is Pole with one L. It's short for politician. AskAPole.com. Cool. All right. So rather than go deeper into journalism history, even though I'm interested in it, I'd love to ask you something juicy to kick this off. I want to know what you think about the UFO, UAP phenomenon broadly, just like how you process it. I gather that you're sort of an agnostic about the subject. So I'm curious about some of your priors on this topic that you bring to the issue.
So it's actually kind of hilarious. I'm a Wired magazine contributor, and the way I got into this topic, I think it was 2023 was when David Grush, the UFO whistleblower, when he first came out. And if y'all remember, he dropped his bombshell in the debrief. That came out in like May or a little later. But that year started with American airspace being invaded by a balloon. And then that balloon that floated all the way from Alaska to South Carolina when it was finally shot down offshore in the ensuing days. So like Senate and I believe House both had like classified hearings because the American people were freaking out, rightfully so. They're like, wait, what is this thing maybe floating over my house, over my grandma's house? Like, what is this? And so lawmakers scrambled to be attentive to their rightfully and righteously angry constituents. And so then, if you remember, after that one balloon is shot down, then in like a span of 3 days, the Air Force then shot down 3 different random objects that they've never divulged what they are. They didn't stop shooting down those objects because they're not still there. They stopped shooting them down because it was freaking the American people out even more. So, like, what did we learn in that entire episode? America does not, even though we drop about $1 trillion of our taxpayer dollars annually, America does not have control of our own skies, which is insane. Like, that's the bare minimum that the Constitution demands of our lawmakers and our people in power. You have to protect us. Even though we drop about $1 trillion a year and all of our missiles are worth millions or whatever, and all of our planes are worth billions or hundreds of millions, we didn't have technology to go slow enough to meet the demand of an air balloon invading our airspace. Like, there's just something wild about that. And then it was on the back of that we had Grush come out with his allegations. So with Wired, they work at magazine speed, which is a beautiful thing and also like really terrible sometimes for us writers, because every other news outlet is, doing a story, and even Wired, the day of Grush stories. But then when I got the pitch accepted and the next week, I had to come at it from a different angle. And so I put David Grush in the context of this conspiratorial Congress. And it was amazing because the UFO, UAP community just started lighting me up when the piece came out. And they were like, this cynical bastard, how dare he treat the topic like this? But I'm like, guys, let's remember, at that time, it was Matt Gaetz, Congresswoman Luna, Burchett, these are the far, far right of the House who make Speaker Johnson blush a lot, who even make Marjorie Taylor Greene blush every once in a while. And so I put him in that context, and I'm pretty sure, I need to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure it was Dean Johnson who just stripped my voice out completely from the piece. And he was like, hey guys, look at this. This reporter asked 9 different, and there was only 9 in the piece, and that's a lot to toss in a 1,000-word or whatever, 1,500-word piece. But he's like, whoever this Matt Laslo guy is, he just asked 9 different lawmakers about our issue, and just overnight, like literally that day, I got like 3,000 new X followers, which, been a political reporter now 19 years. I've been retweeted by AOC when I covered, when I was correspondent for Vice and Vice News Tonight. The joke was I was the squad correspondent because anything AOC did, that'd be a headline for Vice. And so like she's retweeted me. Matt Gaetz has retweeted me. He's always loved me for my drug coverage. He's hated me for my Daily Beast coverage of him, but he's loved my drug coverage of him. So like they both have like millions and millions of followers. Get those retweets, nothing. Maybe 10 new followers, but you lose 20. You're like, what happened? So just nothing. The lake doesn't even move. The UAP community, once that piece was out, it was like, wow, there's a lot of them. They're hungry and they're here. And so I already had the AskaPol.com URL, hadn't done anything with it, just had it. So once that happened, boom, I just deployed it. And I was like, all right, UAPs, this is going to be my test community. And it was fascinating because, David Grush, his claims are twofold. One, that, hey, the government has these programs, which kind of now finding out is actually true. We just found out, or UAP caucus just found out the FBI actually has their own UAP unit, which they didn't know about even 6 months ago. And they also claim that the federal government, or they don't need congressional approval for it, which is a big part of his claim. So Grush's second claim was that there's these hidden SAPs, special access programs. And I'm a congressional junkie, also professor of new media and that stuff. But like I've always got my little pocket constitution nearby. And when David Grush put in Congress's lap, hey, the executive branch is keeping secrets from you. They're breaking the constitutional bonds or whatever that bind us, And once he did that, I was like, okay, I'm going to go ask. And so I did. I went and asked all 100 U.S. senators about his claims. And and Congress to this day has not disproven David Grush. And it's like, hey, guys, he says you're being lied to. You guys have the power constitutionally. I know we all like the shiny object that is the White House. It's easy for us to like watch like reality TV, but no, constitutionally, the power is in Congress's court, or it was. And I think David Grush is kind of proving that the contemporary Congress has neutered itself. Why? Lost on me.
One of the first things that happened to me coming into this subject was I had to train myself not to just use the word government in front of every statement about the cover-up. I had to remind myself that there's like a big difference between the military and intelligence communities and the elected government of like representatives and senators. And even a difference, as you've pointed out, between like the executive administration and then the like deep parts of the military and intelligence communities who would theoretically be in charge of any such SAPs if these things really exist, which it seems to me like they do. But do you have a feeling about Grush's claims, or are you still pretty neutral on like whether they're true?
I always stay neutral, but I can say this without any hesitation. There are UPs all around us, because what did we have at the end of last year? During the New Jersey drone incursion or whatever. Everyone forgets this, but December 2024, there was a public hearing. It might have been November, but I think it was early December of 2024. But the House Homeland Security Committee brought in the FBI, Department of Justice, and Border Patrol. And all three of those agencies, under oath, public hearing, said, no, we have no idea what these things flying overhead are. No idea. And that's so unsettling. So whatever they are. And so now people get on me like, why do you call them drones sometimes? I'm like, I just use the language of my subjects. And when Congress, like in Washington, D.C., drone is the new UAP, and UAP is the new UFO. Like, they have no idea what these things are. And like, not just the Jersey incursions. If you go to the Langley incursions, which was December, I believe, 2023, maybe 2022.
And that's a very important military base pretty near DC. You've mentioned they keep very important stealth bombers there.
I did the math on it. So Langley Air Force Base is in, southeastern Virginia, Newport News, Norfolk area, where there's huge military contingent. That's like 200 miles from DC. Unless you're in an F-22 stealth Raptor, then you're just 30 minutes away. And so during these 17 days incursions, and like Wall Street Journal did an amazing piece, this is a great deep dive in October 2024 on it. And like literally the entire Raptor fleet, which is our 5th generation fighter jet, best in the world, that fighter fleet had to be moved from Langley because they did not have control of their own airspace. What did the U.S. government do? The Pentagon, with their $1 trillion a year budget, what did they do since then? They bought nets. They bought nets to cover up the billions and billions of dollars worth of taxpayer money sitting in these planes, these amazing planes that were rendered useless by things that, according to Virginia Senators Tim Kaine, former vice presidential candidate, he's on the Armed Services Committee, and then Mark Warner, he at that time was chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now he's co-chair. But at the end of this past year, they had another briefing on Langley with the Pentagon, classified, top officials. Both of them came out of there so like gentlemanly furious. They're Southern gentlemen, so they're not going to curse like my buddies in Chicago would. But they were so pissed off because they were like, we don't think that the Pentagon's lying to us. They're like, sometimes we think the Pentagon's lying to us, but like we have, staffers, former staffers who work there. Like we can feel that out, and they have whistleblowers. So like they can feel out when they're being lied to. Their minds were blown because they're like, the Pentagon has no idea after a year what these things are. Not even just like what nation they may have come from, but even what they are.
What they are.
And so that's where, like, especially Republicans on Capitol Hill and this new Congress are just giving the Trump administration and President Trump himself such a pass by saying, oh, the FAA approved this. No, talk to New Jersey Republican Congressman Chris Smith. Nope. He's like, the administration's wrong on this. And at the end of last year, former Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas at Department of Homeland Security, he had a private classified briefing with the New Jersey delegation. And he was like, we got no idea what this is. So I'm actually pressing the Secrets Task Force and UAP caucus members. I'm like, bring in Mayorkas, because either Mayorkas lied to senators, he either lied to Cory Booker's face, lied to now new Senator Andy Kim's face, and the rest of the delegation, or the FAA has no idea what most of these objects were and are. And
I mean, you don't move billions of dollars worth of planes if you approved the drones that flew over them. You don't do that. So that only leaves adversarial or non-human, because it can't be a United States government program, I guess, unless there's just like such a deep, deep version of this program that they're not talking to each other. But that feels like low percentage to me.
But here's the thing. So that is a possibility.
Yeah.
Government-wide ineptitude is very much still in play. And it's kind of terrifying, in this post 9/11 world where like, oh, the Twin Towers fell, Pentagon got hit, American lives, thousands of them, 3,000 plus, were lost because our government wasn't talking to our government. And so you do get people like AOC, Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like her and like Jamie Raskin, who Democrat, he's now the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, but he led one of the impeachment trials against Trump in his first term. Like, they're at the table for this issue for very different reasons than some of the people in the UAP caucus, but they're still sitting there in tandem because this is mostly remained a nonpartisan issue, which also makes the issue kind of a breath of fresh air in a hyper-partisan, hyper-tribal Washington. But the reason they're at the table, like AOC is very suspicious of the what former President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. But like American military contractors, there is a good possibility, and I think some lawmakers, a handful, have a suspicion that the Pentagon gets away. This is how the theory goes. The Pentagon's not lying to members of Congress when they say, we don't know what these are. We have nothing to do with this. If it's, Lockheed Martin, or if it's, Northrop Grumman or whoever. Right. And so I think there's a lot of flaws in that theory. Like at the start of last year, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, she went out and had a classified tour of Air Force bases in Nevada, but also military contractors. So she also met with, I believe, Lockheed and Northrop Grumman while out there. And if it's not a law, it needs to be. But I'm like, I don't believe that they were lying to her face. Because when she came back, she was really, and look up the interview at AskaPol UAPs.com, she was really freaked out. And like what she's been fighting for in this annual defense authorization bill, NDAA or whatever, what she's fighting for is just like basic sensors to cover lower to the ground areas and then higher, parts of our atmosphere, which again takes us back to this stupid balloon that invaded America's airspace. What are they spending $1 trillion of our taxpayer money on? Because we know all these contractors are driving their Beamers and their Mercedes-Benz and they've got their cottages or whatever. And it's like, wait, are you guys getting fat and happy and getting wealthy while being utterly derelict of your most basic duty?
I mean, if they can't even stop incursions over their own bases, then they're clearly not in control of the situation. Do we have a form factor on those objects that made them move the B bombers? Like, was it orbs or drones, or do we even know?
Yeah, again, like the government would probably say drones or something like that. And actually, no, anyone in the government, they just say drones, which is why that term to me has become so meaningless. And I get that people outside of the Beltway, outside of Washington, are dubious of that term drone.
Well, it could cover a lot. I mean, there's a Walmart drone. There's a van-sized drone. There are like the drones we use to assassinate terrorists. There's a big range in there. So, but I don't remember hearing, and I was just wondering if you had heard anything about like the shape or qualities of these objects that flew over Langley.
Well, so some of them, and this is what's interesting. I think some of those were reported. I think one was reported to be 13 feet long. One thing we saw in the New Jersey stuff is the New Jersey incursions, and this is what Congressman Chris Smith, that Republican, brought up in the hearing. He's like, my Coast Guard. And so Chris Smith went out to the beach in the middle of the incursions with, local law enforcement and then Coast Guard. Congressman's going to be on the beach looking into the air, sees what is intruding U.S. airspace. A lot of local officials are going to go along with him if they can. And so you had a lot of officers or whatever. You also had a Coast Guard captain there with him. And with the Coast Guard, and so Smith says they didn't really see anything. But what the Coast Guard captain told them that, like, just like stays with me because it's so insane. The Coast Guard captain said their 40-foot vessel was followed coming in to shore or whatever, was followed by between like 13 and 30 drones. I think it was actually 12 or 30 drones. There's such a huge discrepancy between 12 and 30. And like this Coast Guard captain, according to what Smith told me, and I'm actually like working to have an interview with him, but like,
Cool.
Guy's not a dipshit. You know, he's decorated, he's talented, and he's got a crew that have eyes that work. But our eyes as humans did not seem to work on whatever they were seeing. And that actually could be our eyes as Americans, because that could definitely be foreign tech. But literally, according to the way our minds work and the way that we count, the Coast Guard, even though they felt like they were under attack, like they were freaking out and they were trying to escape these things, you know, just get back to shore. And it was between 12 and 30. Like later on, go outside your house and like count cars. You're gonna, unless you like smoke some really good weed or something, like you're gonna get pretty close, like within 5, you know, especially when they rush by on the highway. Like, yeah, you might say between 10 and 15, between 12 and 18, but between 12 and 30, that's just such a wide discrepancy. And I think a big part of that is just because what they report is they don't know what they saw. And what they reported was objects of all different sizes. And so,
wow.
Yeah.
Were they seeing them visually, do you know, or were they using sensors like radar or some other kind of?
Probably. And that's the thing. So probably both. And like I've pressed, you know, our AskaPol community is awesome. They send me their questions, their skepticism, everything. And then I just take it to lawmakers. And so our community, a lot of folks were like, hey, have you talked to like the Michigan lawmakers, the Alaska lawmakers, where some of those objects were shot down after that initial balloon intrusion in 2023? And when I first asked the Alaska senators, Murkowski and then Dan Sullivan, they were both like, no, we know it was a balloon type thing. I was like, but did you ask to see pictures? And both said no. Well, then when I asked Senator Sullivan 6 months later, hoping he did like a follow-up with the Air Force, because like it's Alaska. The Air Force is very in tune with the Alaska delegation. And so, you know, they know each other, et cetera. Like Senator Murkowski was showing us when she went on a submarine in the middle of a glacier. The sub popped up. Yeah, they get to do cool stuff up there in Alaska.
Damn.
But so 6 months later, Sullivan was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw them. I'm pretty sure he didn't. Because when he was closer to the moment and I asked him point blank, he's like, no, I never asked, never saw any images. And so there's a new congressman. Alaska only has most landmass, I believe, in the US, but they only have one member of the House. He was at the last UAP roundtable on the Hill. So he's going to be an interesting one to watch because it seems like he's interested in this issue. Cool. You know, it's Alaska. They get sightings of everything. And so I'm kind of hoping that he'll pull that thread. And like so many of these lawmakers, like same with the Michigan senators, they're like, no, we knew that the Air Force said they shot stuff down in Michigan. And I'm from the Midwest. Grandparents have a cottage in Michigan that I grew up going to. And so those Michigan senators were like, no, we just never asked. And like that lack of curiosity throughout Congress and throughout government is just such a stain on the America that we've been sold, you know, in our like 7th grade civics classes. Like, no, like who? Take Senator Mark Kelly. Yeah, his brother Scott Kelly, but the former astronaut. He is 1,000% convinced that no, there's no UFOs, no da da da. In the same breath, he's also 1,000% convinced that there in Arizona, his Luke Air Force Base in the Barry Goldwater Range, where a U.S. fighter jet just in the past few weeks was hit by an unknown object. And he's convinced it's foreign adversaries. Like he is so disbelieving that it could be anything extraterrestrial that he's 1,000% convinced it's American adversaries. And I'm like, hold the effing presses. Like, if you think American airspace, and according to him, if you know American airspace is regularly invaded by our adversaries, why the heck are we debating tax policy? Why the heck are we debating any of this other BS that's just political dunking and dunking and dunking on both sides of the aisle? Like, if you are on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate and you're convinced American airspace is regularly invaded by our adversaries, stop everything and address that.
Should be a huge deal. Is that
Right?
what you think freaked out Senator Gillibrand? You said she talked to some contractors and that she came back pretty rattled from that. Is your impression that she feels like we're not defended enough against various kinds of intrusion?
And like, not to mischaracterize her, but it didn't seem like she was scared. She was righteously pissed off, you know, and she was like, because her eyes were big. She's like, we had a flaw. And it was actually interesting. Or she's like, we have a flaw in our system. But it was interesting because when I first went up and talked to her about it, I brought it up in the context of, she is one of the few senators who publishes their schedule. And I think, again, it was Dean Johnson who was like, hey, she had this UAP part of her tour out west last year. And so pushing around on that, I initially was like, so when you were like doing these UAP briefings out there, and she's like, classified, can't talk about it. Well, then it was like 10 minutes later, she's coming off the Senate floor, and I just asked about it from a different angle without bringing up the classified stuff.
Nice.
And that's where she just like, I know, and I kind of accidentally did it. And then I was like, oh, wait, that worked. But it was beautiful because she was just like, you could tell it was just this genuine disappointment, like being let down. I mean, and part of that was personal because she's on the Armed Services Committee. And at that time, she was one of only 6 U.S. senators. So 6 out of 100. She was only one of the 6 who serves on both the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee. You know, in Armed Services, that's like Pentagon, all things military, Intel. I don't fully know what they do, but that's all things CIA and, you know, just America's secrets and all that. And so she has this special perch, which has like made her kind of the most powerful and most meaningful voice on this issue within the Senate, even though I know 90% or 99% of folks listening are rolling their eyes right now. Like, Gillibrand's not an advocate. Like, she's deep state, blah, blah, blah. Guys, this is the Senate that the American people have given you. And I'm sorry, but Senator Gillibrand is your biggest, loudest advocate as of now. That might be, and she's a gatekeeper, but I think she's really freaked out by the issue. And especially when she's looking at, like, we don't have control of our airspace down here, and we don't have sensors tracking way up here. And that's just a huge, not even problem. Like, that kind of shows that we're sitting ducks. And now, like, after the Chinese New Year drone display, you're having more lawmakers' eyes open up. I mean, because what are we doing? Like, in the big, you know, Trump's one big beautiful bill that the House passed a couple weeks ago, the Senate still needs to. They plussed up the Pentagon budget, I think 100 billion or something like that. Or that's the fight maybe in the Senate. They want another 100 or so billion for the Pentagon. Guys, the people, especially the lobbyists fighting for that extra money, are doing it so we can build more ships and more planes. Look at Ukraine and Russia. We're witnessing the first ever drone war. And here we are. We don't even know what's flying over American military bases, American nuclear sites, American armament factories, munitions depots, because that's where they were hovering in New Jersey. Munitions depots, and then, the current president's golf course, which, is protected by the Secret Service year round. And it's like, guys, they're only over these sensitive spots. And so, like, at the end of the day, it's like, shame on us and shame on this Congress and shame on the military industrial complex for them getting rich, fat, and happy when it seems to me like America right now is just utterly susceptible to whatever these are.
I get a little more shame to spread around. I would maybe layer some on the media and the scientific community. And
amen.
From the perspective of thinking about the UFOs more broadly,
burn the media down.
The history of the subject is that these sensitive installations have been observed by drone-like things for almost 80 years, like way, way, way before what we have currently as drone technology. So now we're like, oh yeah, who knows? Because everybody's got these things. But if you're talking about like a nuclear incident in the 1960s or something, like drones didn't exist. There was not an object that could be doing this, like let alone shutting down missiles or whatever. And you go back into the 40s or 50s and these sightings, like they just could not be the kind of advanced technology that we're talking about now. Like maybe we have retrofitted some modern American versions of the Tic Tac or whatever, but we didn't do it in 1947. And if we had, we would have used that technology instead of spending literally trillions of dollars to build B-22 bombers, which I'm sure are also in that Pentagon budget from this year.
And that's the other thing. Like, I get the whole deep state rhetoric and all that, but like, guys, our American government is very representative of America. These aren't the smartest people running the joint.
What's like, that classic phrase about never attributing to malice that which can be attributed to incompetence? I don't remember where it comes from, but pretty good.
Something like that. And like, that's the thing. And like when people look back at 9/11 and they're like, oh, inside job, you know, Dick Cheney had dynamite throughout the two towers. I'm like, oh, if you all only knew how inept your government is. Like, sure, our CIA, they're deaf. Like our SEALs, like we're pretty pristine on a lot of stuff. But when it comes to like these big conspiracies that take 2-3 scenes to play out, no, we're bumbling reality TV morons.
Harder to imagine. Yeah, Occam's razor is we don't have all the answers, or there are a bunch of things we still don't know. Something that jumped out at me from the last couple of weeks is this Skywatcher guy, James Fowler, went on American Alchemy and said a lot of the interactions he's had with the military have been like, well, this sounds interesting, tell us more. Like they're not trying to shut Skywatcher down. They're curious about what they're finding out. And it could be that when those B-22 bombers got moved from Langley, the people in charge were like, we don't know what the hell these things are, and we would love for somebody to tell us. I'm curious, do you think anybody in the Congress does have kind of like a higher level of read on the situation? Like the Gang of Eight, did Chuck Schumer know something that the rest of us don't when he wrote non-human into his bill 22 times? Like, is there anyone on the Hill that has like a little bit of an inside track on this?
Well, so this is the interesting thing. So you mentioned the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight, real quickly, that's like the four. So what is it? Speaker, then the minority leader in the House, then Senate majority leader, Senate minority leader, and then it's the heads of Hipsky and Skitsky, whatever, but the heads of the House Intelligence Committee. So those two, Demon are, and then the Senate head of Intel, left and right. And so, like,
so again, that's the majority and minority leaders of the House and the Senate, and the heads of the committees on intelligence, and the vice heads in the House and the Senate.
You said that so much better.
I'm looking at Judge.
I did. Well, so that's called the Gang of Eight, and like, there are things that the Gang of Eight knows that no one else in Congress knows, and that's just how the system is built. And so, what would it be? I don't know if I have this 100% confirmed, but I'm pretty sure before we went in to Pakistani airspace and, you know, capped Osama bin Laden's ass, pretty sure Gang of Eight was read in on that at the end, or at least they would be the first people, you know, after a successful mission, or if it fucked up, like, pardon my French, but if it went to shit, pardon my other French, like happened under Carter, Gang of Eight would be the first people the Pentagon
They get
call.
notified, yeah. And there are like legal restrictions about executive actions that have to go through the Gang of Eight, or at least involve mandatory notification of the Gang of Eight.
Well, actually, better example, warrantless wiretapping. The Gang of Eight was read in on the warrantless wiretapping program after 9/11. They weren't able to talk about it. And so that's where sometimes, and we've heard this complaint from members of the UAP caucus, they're like, we go into that skiff and, you know, the secure compartmented
information facility.
Classified little cubbies hiding in the Capitol. Where Congressman Tim Burchett, one of the UAP caucus co-chairs, has told me repeatedly, he's like, it's so frustrating. Because he's like, yeah, we want the classified information. But sometimes, and each time they're in there, they have to sign away. He's like, I sign away my life. And so once they're in there, he's like, they can show me something that I just read about in the New York Times.
Yeah.
Now that I'm seeing it in this classified setting, I can no longer talk about it.
Right.
Even though I could have before I came in here.
Yeah.
And so you get some of that. And so, yes, the Gang of Eight does have knowledge the rest of Congress doesn't. And there's been times where, because I was the correspondent for Virginia Public Radio for a decade or whatever. Again, I've covered Congress 19 years. So I've been here longer than Senator Mark Warner, one of the co-chairs of Intel. So there's been times like him and I are playing 5-dimensional chess with each other. Like for a while, his office had a rule that he wouldn't talk to me because, like, oh, Laslo is gonna, like, you know,
hit me with the UFOs,
do some gotcha journalism. Well, so like, I'm pretty sure at one point he like went and took a phone call from his aide that was standing right next to me, and I'm like,
get out
wait,
of talking to you.
I'm literally like, hey, Senator, are you taking a call from him? So I actually took a picture of it. It was up at AskaPole.com.
Oh, that's funny.
And so another time, like, I'm on the tram with him and his, like, maybe chief of staff, maybe deputy chief of staff, who I've known for years. And he's like, hey. And so I'm like, all right, I'm not recording. We're just chatting. This is off the record between us. But I'm like, or, you know, on background, but just between us. And he's like, you know, sometimes I just can't, like, talk about some of this stuff. And I'm like, sir, do you know that in the year and a half that AskaPole has been around, we've debunked more rumors than the entire U.S. government has in the past 70 years regarding this topic? And Warner looks at his aide and he goes, is that correct? And she's like, yeah, but, and she's like, oh, but Laslo also fosters rumors with AskaPole UAPs. No. I take rumors, facts, verified, unverified. If the community's talking about something, I just go and I take that question to members of Congress. I don't stand by what they say. They're politicians. They lie for a living. But they're empowered according to our Constitution and according to you, the voters. You've empowered these people. And so there's this beautiful give and take. And I think what we're seeing now in these past 2 years, really, 2022 was the first UAP hearing, and actually UFO hearing in the past 50 years. And then now we've had one a year since then. And so I think you're seeing members of Congress finally push for more answers. And I think they're being responsive to their voters, to the public. And so you're kind of seeing this reassessment of things at the top. But like, sometimes I ask Warner questions and he just looks at me like, there's an answer to that. I just can't say it. And that's where we don't know if it's military contractors, if it's foreign nations, etc.
That's this. Another guy you've mentioned here is Jim Himes, is the ranking Democratic member on House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. So just to read the whole Gang of Eight right now in 2025, it's Mike Johnson, Hakeem Jeffries, John Thune, Chuck Schumer, Rick Crawford, Jim Himes, Tom Cotton, and Mark Warner. Sounded like of those eight, the most like attack surface you've got is with Jim Himes and Mark Warner. There are some other interesting people in here, obviously. I'm curious about.
I've asked them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pardon me, real quick, because when I asked all 100 senators about Grush,
Mm-hmm.
you can go like that's pinned at the top of AskaPol UAPs. And just to alert you, dear viewer, listener, you're gonna be disappointed.
Like a lot of people have never heard of him.
Like, no, most because I did it right after Grush dropped his claims, and I was asking about his claims. So half of them was me informing lawmakers, like, "Hey, do you know this is going on?"
Yeah.
But with that, I asked all 100. So Mitch McConnell, who I used to cover for Kentucky Public Radio, specifically WEKU, Southeastern Kentucky coal country. And so he knows me. I've had sit downs with him in his office where, we stared each other's in the eyes. When I brought up the name David Grush, he looked at me and he stared at me. Like, he doesn't really do hallway interviews ever, even now that he's like The Walking Dead. And no longer in power. He's still like won't answer questions. And I'm like, someone should tell him that he's powerless and that he should talk if he actually wants to be heard. But whatever, he's gonna be an asterisk to the MAGA movement. But usually McConnell just keeps staring straight forward.
Mm-hmm.
That time when I said, "Hey, are you familiar with David Grush?" He made eye contact with me, and his eyes didn't get big. He's a good poker player, but they were bigger than usual. And I was like, okay, so you know who he is.
Interesting.
Same thing with Schumer. And I wrote it up on the pieces so I kind of forget because it was a couple years ago. Same thing with Schumer. I waited. He was coming with his entourage. They have their security details with them, and then also aides and all that. And I was standing on the big set of marble stairs that just kind of like comes down from the press galleries from the third floor of the Senate to the second floor where the Senate chamber is. And Schumer's coming with his entourage. And I make a joke or I get him to laugh. I'm like my Midwestern self, like, "Hey, how are you, sir?" And he isn't answering questions, but he responds and he goes, "Yeah, I'm good, blah, blah, blah." And I go, "Do you know the name David Grush?" And then he scowls and says nothing and keeps walking. He didn't. I'm like, wait. There was a change there.
Yeah.
There was a change there, Mr. Leader. And so
if he didn't know, he would have been like, "Who? Excuse me? What?
What are you talking about?
Right.
Little fool." They both cursed me out, like gentlemanly cursed me out, like
interesting.
Or whatever.
All right. Well, since we're there, let's do a little bit more Grush because he's the most interesting thing that's happened in 2025. I guess other than Skywatcher is also very interesting. Jake Barber and the crew that's chasing UAP with their tech, very interesting stuff. But Grush is actually working for Eric Burlison right now, and you've broken some news about this. You broke at the end of April. You reported that Grush got his top secret clearance back, but I think you also reported that the SAP clearances he used to have are still pending. So we'll see if he gets read back into some of those programs that he used to have access to. But at least theoretically, he is now accessible to the UAP caucus and to maybe other people on the Hill. I don't know if this helped, but I wrote my congressman and said, "Can you please call Eric Burlison's office and just ask what the hell is up?" And I would recommend that other people do something like that to just help educate their people, their representatives. But I also think I heard you say that Grush is working remotely mostly, that he lives in California with his family and he's out in DC only sometimes. Is that right?
So a couple things to correct there.
Okay.
I have said, because I thought he was Californian, so I've actually never met David Grush.
Okay.
I interview Congress, and even though he's now a congressional staffer, I think that almost makes it harder for me to ever get an interview with him. What I'm going to try to do is wait a month or two, maybe right ahead of the August recess, try to get a sit down with Burleson and Grush. But after they've done some stuff, because I think it doesn't make sense for a member of Congress to ever have their staffer out there speaking their own mind. It just doesn't. Members of Congress are there for their own reelection, like that. The Capitol, I call it the greatest reelection center known to man, because it's literally, there are bipartisan studios with green screens, with full podcast studios, like 10 times better than what we have at NPR, where I've worked for years. And that's bipartisan because Congress built Congress to keep themselves in power, and F them for it.
Sure, but on the other hand, it is cool that they're
exempted?
constantly running. Like, that is one of the better parts of the American system, is that
Fair.
vote the bums out every few years.
But like, who's exempted from FOIAs? Congress. Why? Because Congress wrote the FOIA law. And it's like,
that's a good point. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so that's where, like, I'm trying to push, especially these newer MAGA members. I'm like, hey guys, let's go full on. Let's drop a transparency A-bomb on the world. Put Congress under FOIA.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Leadership
they
won't allow it, but no, it's not happening. But like, so with Grush, I've slowly been informing senators, like, real slowly, because I take my time with Congress, and I'm like, hey, remember that name, David Grush? Mark Warner, I think I already dropped it, but I might not have yet. Maybe I did last week. Exclusive with Senator Warner. But once I started asking questions, he just wanted to get away. And you hear that. Like, he seems, John Fetterman, the Pennsylvania senator in the hoodie, shorts, he sees him walking up. Warner has never had to have a conversation with John Fetterman, except for when AskaPole UAPs had a David Grush question for Warner. And then he's like, oh, I'll talk later. Hey, Fetterman, it took 2 seconds. And then they both go to separate elevators. I'm like, Warner, come on. You got to get better at this chess game here, bro.
It sounds like you're saying that they are a little uncomfortable talking about this subject. And I heard you say elsewhere that they're getting a little wary about UAPs in general, or UAP. I prefer the plural UAP. There's no S at the end of phenomena. That personally, that works for me. But is that a trend you're noticing? Like, is this subject getting harder to talk to them about? Or
wait, you just blew my mind. You just blew my mind on phenomena. Yeah, it shouldn't be an S.
Right? UFOs make sense. Objects ends with an S. UAP should be plural, like sheep.
Wait, is my entire UAP life a fraud because we're AskaPole UAPs?
Everybody says UAPs. All the formal government documents say UAPs. I say UAP.
Dude, like, Professor Laslo, like,
I'm a grammatical pedant, and that I just prefer that. It seems right to me.
Bro, I had to switch from red pens to pink because my red pens were making my students want to jump off buildings. They still get the same amount of critiques on their papers as now it's in friendly pink.
Oh, that's fun. That was a really good idea.
But so back to the Grush thing.
Is it getting harder to get answers about UAP?
Oh, no. So the interesting thing is, again, I've covered Congress 19 years. I've trained a lot of press secretaries, people on the Hill. I teach political communication. So I've trained a Trump press secretary and then like senior admin at like moveon.org in the same classroom. First day of class, I get in, slam the door shut, and I say, "You're effing politics, stay out there." We're here to talk history and practice and all that. And so the biggest kind of mind F that we've seen in recent years on anything, I'd even say recent decades, is Congressman Eric Burleson hiring whistleblower David Grush as his staffer. I need to actually reach out to the House and Senate historians, but no lawmaker who's even been there for decades and decades has ever seen anything like this. It's just so novel. Like, because what have we had in the past? I cover a lot of tech and privacy issues or whatever. Like, we've had Meta whistleblowers, we've had Instagram whistleblowers, even though they're technically Meta, but none of them have been hired by the Senate Commerce Committee, that's doing the investigation into children's privacy online or whatever.
That is interesting. I would have thought that it might have happened before now.
If anyone knows, let me know. Professor Laslo will give you extra credit, which in this case will mean I'll comp you 6 months free for a VIP AskaPole thing. But if anyone out there knows of another whistleblower, I mean, because what would it be like? It would be during the McCarthy era for McCarthy to like have hired maybe Ronald Reagan, because Reagan might have been like the whistleblower, like, oh, Hollywood's all these socialists, blah, blah, blah. Like, if McCarthy had hired Reagan, that'd be a game changer. It might have meant Reagan never became governor, might have meant Reagan never became president, but it might have meant a whole new tinge and seriousness and gravitas brought to that issue, because Reagan was high up, and I think he was president of Motion Picture Association. So like, that's what we've seen huge whistleblowers, whether it's MLB, steroids, all that stuff. But none of these committees have ever hired those people. And
so that feels like progress to you then, like maybe explosive potentially.
I mean, progress, whatever. But like one thing we're seeing, and I'm pretty sure we can tie this to Grush, but what do we see from the UAP caucus? 2 years of their investigation kind of going nowhere. Like they couldn't even get some skiff briefings they wanted. They couldn't even get David Grush, who's now Burleson staffer. They couldn't even get him to come in. And like when he testified, July 13th, I believe, 2023, when he testified in that public hearing in the House, half of what he said was, there's an answer for that, ma'am. I just can't discuss it here.
I could tell you in a skiff. I could tell you in a skiff. I could tell you in a skiff. And they never got that conversation. Is that right?
And so they never got it. Now he has his clearance back. But then this is where it becomes interesting with these little congressional or bureaucratic hoops and hurdles. So he can't work because like the Secrets Task Force, which is basically the UAP caucus. So last Congress, now they're kind of commingled, but like they don't have a budget as of now to hire their own staff or whatever. So Grush is a part-time staffer for Congressman Burleson. And so with that,
who makes this decision about the skiffs? Is that a military? It goes into the Pentagon and some nameless, faceless DOD guy says you can't have a skiff?
Yes and no. I think it comes like in the Capitol, the ultimate decision would land with the speaker or the majority leader, but their offices aren't active in it. And so that's where it really kind of feels like they've been present from a distance on purpose. And so, I mean, because if the speaker wants the entire House to have a UAP classified briefing today at 6 p.m. or whatever,
he could theoretically do that.
They're going to get it. Like, it's done. Like, the speaker runs the House.
This is
the majority leader in the Senate runs the Senate.
Okay. So this is an internal problem to Congress. Like Burchett and Luna would love to have a skiff.
Yes.
But if Mike Johnson says no, then they don't get one.
But yes and no. This is the beauty of bureaucratic entanglements. I think the way the speaker and the Senate leader do it is they play their allies off them. And so I think the Pentagon or whoever would have to come to them and request, hey, can we do this? And like, again, this is where these are great questions that even members of Congress don't have answers to. Because I'm like, where's the holdup? Where's the complaints coming from? And nobody knows.
Nobody even knows.
And so that's where, again, for 2 years, the UAP caucus was investigating this and they got nowhere. Well, boom, you bring David Grush in. I think he signed the paperwork beginning of April. And then guess what? Within a month and a half, the UAP caucus / Secrets Task Force, now for the first time ever, is connected with the FBI and their UFO or UAP unit.
That's pretty interesting.
Pretty sure. So I don't have this confirmed, and I don't print stuff that isn't confirmed. But like, and I'm not good at math, but I'm like, wait, Grush comes in, and then a month and a half later, you guys find this office. It seems, and like what Burleson and others have told me is like that Grush hire was
very
thumbs
helpful.
up me. They're like,
Oh,
this
man.
was a smart move.
God, I hope so. Yeah, that was really cool of Burleson. There was also this recent hiccup, though, with a skiff that they got authorized, but people didn't show, or like the way we've heard it from the people who were invited, they said like they didn't get an invitation in enough time that they could be there. But what Luna said to you was everybody got sick, maybe air quotes, maybe she's using sick euphemistically there, but she it sounded like what she was saying is I organized this skiff and they didn't come, which, you know, seems like a giant fuck up. I wondered what you made of that.
Well, no, and that's where there's a few different things at play, it seems. And to actually answer part of your earlier question, so Grush, I don't think he lives in California. Someone told me he actually lives in Colorado.
Okay.
But whatever. He lives out there in the West.
Yeah, I don't know. I would never say if I did.
Exactly. And that's where I'm like, I kind of like the confusion. Colorado, California,
but
whatever.
He's not in DC, probably, at least most of the time.
So Grush has hired, Burleson has hired Grush as a part-time staffer, which basically comes down to about 1 day a week. And I think what they're going to do is like some weeks he might be in DC 5 days a week. And like, and Congress is so lazy, they're going to take all of August off, you know? So like, instead of working just that 1 day a week in August, they'll work 5 days in July or something like that. And so they're still kind of feeling that out. The interesting thing, when that skiff briefing you just brought up was canceled recently, earlier in the week, which the week was what Burleson called UAP week. And then once the public hearing was canceled, then I started calling it dark UAP week. But Burleson and Grush, it seems, had a private skiff briefing with the two of them and Arrow, their new head.
Cool.
And so that seemed really illuminating to Burleson. Again, I haven't talked to Grush, don't know the people at Arrow. They don't return my messages or tweets.
Okay, well, I have another side.
I know they read them.
Arrow. This guy Kozlowski seems interesting. And sorry, you have more to go. I'd love to, if you could just fold in Luna's take on Arrow this week or last week, as of when we're speaking, which was like, we should defund these guys. They're not doing anything. And she said, you know, another agency's being more transparent. Maybe she meant the FBI. Maybe she meant Skywatcher.
She did mean the FBI.
She did. Okay.
It seems to me, because look at the interviews we have with up at AskaPolUAPs.com. But yeah, they were just gushing. And like literally, this is what's mind-blowing. After their 2-year investigation, Congress didn't even know that there was a group within the FBI dealing with this issue.
Oh my God.
That's been around. I know. And they say it's tiny, it's small. And then even once we reported that they exist, which, you know, some people online were like, what are you talking about? This isn't news. We've all known this. Not to Congress. It was breaking news to these members of Congress, and their minds were just blown. And they're like, oh, the heavens opened up, and like, we saw the way. And so then later that night or next day or whatever, it was Friday night, I get a call. Again, covered Congress 19 years. This is my first time getting a call from a member of Congress on a Friday night being like, hey, just so you know, this certain agency is not happy with your reporting.
Really?
And I'm like, I'm gonna tweet this shit out right now.
Nice.
Like, Andy, you're a member of fucking Congress. Like, are you timid? Are you a little scared? Like, you're fucking Congress. And so the interesting thing to me is like, Arrow is still an infant. You know, it was only created, I believe, 2022 bipartisanly. And a big reason, if you look up one of our last interviews with Marco Rubio before he became Secretary of State, he was so pissed off at Sean Kirkpatrick for what he did with Arrow, because I'm asking Rubio questions and Rubio's literally like, that's why we created Arrow. And it was almost him admitting we created Arrow so that we didn't have to bother with idiots like you, Laslo. We didn't want to answer these questions. We created them to do our homework for us. And there was honest frustration with him because he's like, I don't want to deal with this stuff. I've got other stuff to deal with. That's why we created Arrow. And so Arrow was always created to be public facing.
Yeah.
And almost instantaneously, the public that matters, the 3.3 or 3.4 million strong and UFO Reddit, they instantaneously were like Arrow's BS. Like,
well,
power.
To be fair to them, like Kirkpatrick has just been, he was a total dork about this. But rather than get bogged down in talking about somebody we both don't think is super helpful to this conversation, I have a few more questions for you, and then I'll let you go, unless you want to hop in. You want to hop in?
Well, I was going to say, Marco Rubio agrees that Sean Kirkpatrick is worthless. So we can leave it at that.
And it sounds like Gillibrand was probably pretty disappointed in him too. So Mama and Papa from the Senate didn't end up loving the baby they created. Okay, so I have a few more questions, and then we'll let you go. One is dream interviews. If you could get in a room and administer sodium pentothal to a bunch of people from the deep state or from the higher up security apparatus, who would you want to talk to, current or former serving officials, either military intelligence folks or elected officials? Who would be some of your top hits just to get info about UAP? Where do you think these secrets are in the minds of living people?
Well, to me right now with this new administration, and we keep hearing this mantra from Republicans that oh, this is the most transparent administration ever. I'm like, no. We've heard promises of that. We've heard rhetoric of that, but no, back it up. Where's the documentation that the FAA actually knew what was flying over Jersey and the East Coast? And so that's where we're kind of seeing. And we see this with any time, when Obama had, when Democrats controlled the Senate and the House and the White House, it was kind of the same thing. They all get super tribal and they protect their own, which ends up making them lose power for the next few years, And so we're seeing the same thing play out again, where Republicans, I think, are really stupidly, for lack of a better term, but it's just idiotic. They're just buying into what the administration's telling them without actually looking into it. And that's where I get it on one level. And that is the answer to your question. It seems like Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, she has been feeding lawmakers some stuff. And so that's where it's interesting. And I think I still haven't fully reported this, and it's something we'll be reporting for the full year and, this entire session of Congress for the next year and a half. But so part of me is okay, this secrets task force, you guys are going to solve Jeffrey Epstein, JFK, MLK, 9/11.
Yeah, not going to happen. I've heard you say this earlier. This is these. It kind of seems like the chuckleheads in the House got pushed off to the side and assigned the Scooby-Doo files, basically. No offense to these guys. I really do appreciate their passion, but this is not a tree they're going to successfully bark up, at least all the way to UAP.
And so that's where it does feel like this is a little bit of a trap from leadership. Hey, instead of you guys just putting all your energy and resources into this one shiny orb, instead of just putting all your attention there, we're going to have you focus on these 50,000 orbs. And cool.
Yeah, and they're going to run out of time. I mean, the task force was assigned a 6-month window. So an interesting point about the ODNI, Avril Haines under Biden also was it made some pretty interesting sounds, and she was the head of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So Tulsi Gabbard is in a key perch. I'd be curious about the head of the CIA, maybe chairman of the Joint Chiefs. A person who doesn't seem like they know much is Pete Hegseth, but somewhere in the Defense Department, there would be people, right?
And that's where I don't know Hegseth. But like knowing Rubio and what Rubio told me right after Grush's claims came out, what Rubio told me, and which he never really got an answer for, but Rubio, not quite exact quote, but look it up at AskaPole.com. He said, we're sent as the intelligence committee because Warner was chair and then Rubio vice chair. And the way the intel committee works, like it's not really one's above the other. They're just in tandem. It's very historically has been very nonpartisan. And so Rubio, he was like, we get whistleblowers all the time. And he would have said whistleblowers. He's like, we get complaints all the time. He says, with David Grush's complaints, he said it's the first time that the inspector general went over the claims, sent it to Congress saying, this seems legit, as in like from what we've looked into, like, hey, this is valid. And also, what was it? That it seemed valid, but that also, yeah, like you guys should vet him, take him serious. Oh no, and pardon me, seems valid, and then also marked like urgent. And Rubio's like, that's the first time kind of that he's seen that. And so that's where I think you had the Senate staff. I don't think Warner and Rubio were actually in those briefings with Grush, but Senate staff sat down with him for hours and hours and hours, it seems. And he divulged a lot of this. So yes, Rubio's now Secretary of State. So he's got everything. Anything that happens across the globe is on his plate. So yeah, he's got a lot going on.
He's also been serving as an acting national security advisor, right?
Exactly. But he's also been curious about this issue. And coming from Congress, where you're constantly frustrated because the administration's lying to you, or him on Intel, he knows a lot of stuff that he can't talk about, even with his wife and kids. And a lot of that stuff he doesn't think should be classified. And so that's where he's one who I'd be very curious now. Hey, have you, now that you have the power, now that you're in the administration, have you looked into some of that stuff? It would actually be a question I'd want to ask him maybe in 3-4 months. You know, just so much is happening and has been happening that I doubt this has been at the top of his agenda, but it's something that I know he's versed on and cares about. So that's where right now, those would be the two I'd want, Tulsi Gabbard and Rubio. And it'll be interesting to see whether they're just kind of placating these members of Congress on the Secrets Task Force, like giving them a little nugget here, a little nugget there, or whether they're actually, you know, divulging stuff that we haven't seen. And that's where the Secrets Task Force, I've been very harsh on them. The first few months, you know, first 100 days of the Trump administration. But what Luna tells me, Chairwoman, Secrets Task Force Chair Anna Paulina Luna, she tells me that Oversight Chair James Comer granted them a 6-month extension. That's something I hope to verify this week when, or this coming week when Congress is back. I'm going to ask Comer, hey, have you granted them a 6-month extension? And what Luna says is, she's like, yeah, we were granted the 6-month extension. She says, with that, we're going to see more stuff on UAPs. And I think part of that is because they've been having backdoor talks with Tulsi Gabbard and maybe other folks in the administration. So we'll see. I think Congress putting the pressure on the past White House, the last White House, and then this current one is meaningful. But you talk to people in the UAP community and they're so dubious, and rightfully so. They're like, these gatekeepers, no, they're just going to keep tickling us here, give us a public hearing here, blah, blah, blah. We'll see what comes of it. And so, like, as skeptical as I am of the Secrets Task Force, knowing that they're working in tandem with the Director of National Intelligence and potentially also the Secretary of State and the President Trump, has talked about some stuff he learned about Roswell or whatever. So it's not totally off Trump's radar. And so there's something interesting there, nothing to report on yet, but that's number one thing burning in my notebook. Is what are those conversations? What are they learning? Because having an administration that's helpful would be a game changer. I don't think we've seen that yet.
Yeah.
I know members of the House think, in the majority, they think they've seen that. They think we're there. Prove it. Like, according to the Democrats, we haven't seen that yet. And so
there does seem to be a frustrating pattern of people getting closer to the subject and then shutting down a little bit more. So like that doesn't always happen. Chuck Schumer, by virtue of his closeness, seems to have moved us toward legislation, which maybe will come up again this year, we hope. But let's take a different tack.
Wait. Take that
go
back.
ahead.
Chuck Schumer has not done a damn thing on this issue.
Not since proposing that legislation in like 2022?
Well, no. Chuck Schumer's name is attached to legislation dealing with UAPs.
And he did that one colloquy with Rounds where they stood on the floor and talked to each other a little bit.
But what is Schumer doing? And remember, I'm from Illinois, and we have the number 2 Senate Democrat, Dick Durbin, minority whip now. When Harry Reid, former majority leader of the Senate from Nevada, when he stepped aside, instead of him saying, hey, this is going to, my caucus is going to deal with this, but it's going to naturally go to Dick Durbin, the number 2. Harry Reid went over the head of Dick Durbin and said, this is going to go to Chuck Schumer. So my kind of joke, my kind of intuition is that Dick Durbin kind of smirks and laughs off this issue. Chuck Schumer just wants power. And so Chuck Schumer kind of gave a blood oath to Harry Reid. Like, hey, I'm going to carry on your legacy. I know you care about this issue, so I'm going to carry it on. Like, literally, that is what the UAPDA, the UAP Disclosure Act, that's what, from all my reporting, it seems like that is Chuck Schumer keeping his promise to his former friend, leader Harry Reid. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know if I'm sure, but like, I just like to joke that like Durbin got passed over because he laughed at ET, and Schumer's like, no, I'll suck ET's blah, 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 Like, Schumer will do whatever for power. So what did we see the first year? It was Schumer's amendment. And what did he do to get cover? He brought on 2 Democrats with him, Senator Gillibrand and then Senator Martin Heinrich from New Mexico. So there was 3 Dems. Well, then you had Senator Rounds, the lead negotiator. Actually, pardon me, the only negotiator it seemed on this bill was Senator Rounds, because then there was also attached to it Marco Rubio and then Indiana Congressman Todd Young. Talking to Todd Young and Rubio, they're like, yeah, we have no clue what's in the UAPDA. They just asked us if we'd co-sponsor. And so that's where I know the community puts a lot of hope and trust in that measure. But from those members, it kind of seemed like it was so broadly bipartisan that it was just like kind of milquetoast. Or maybe they didn't even think it was going to go anywhere. So like there is a world where Chuck Schumer is the one who's defeating Chuck Schumer's own UAPDA amendment. I have not proven that with any reporting, but what I have done for the past year and a half, if not 2 years, is literally at least once a month, if not once a week, ask who gutted Schumer's, at the time he was the Senate Majority Leader, who gutted the Senate Majority Leader's own amendment to his base. And I have not been able to find an answer to that, whether Republicans in the House, leaders, Jim Hine, Mike Turner, none of them would even admit to it. And so like there's been a big mystery to me cloaked around that effort. And what did we see the following year? First year, it was Schumer's bill. And this might have been wise strategery or whatever we call it. But the following year, it was introduced by Senator Mike Rounds, Republican, like affable, like quirky grandpa, quirky dad from South Dakota, former governor. Like everyone trusts him. He's just like a genuine guy who knows a lot more than he lets on. So Rounds, the bill, when it came out the next year in the NDAA, he said, or it was his name stamped to it. So it wasn't Schumer's. And like, that could just be wise strategery. Hey, maybe this got derailed last time because it was Schumer's bill. And, Republicans don't want to give Schumer a win. And so like, yes, it could have been that, but reaching out to Schumer's office, I was like, hey, did David Grush and his allegations have anything to do with Schumer introducing the UAPDA? And the office was categorically no. Categorically no. And
that's so weird because the main thrust of the legislation is like, hey, if anybody has non-human technology, we want it.
And that's the thing. And that's where I'm still fishing around, is what I call it. I go and interview a ton of lawmakers and I'm just fishing. I'm curious, for one, who's pushing back against that effort? Because on one level, it's kind of lukewarm, because they're saying like, this is just like what we did with the JFK files. It's been so long. Let's just release that. And so I think on one level,
a review committee like the JFK files.
Yeah. And so like, I can see Schumer and them and his team being like, oh, if there's anything in here that we still want to keep classified, we can. And like his sources in the military, that. And so like, it never seemed like the game changer to me that it did to people in the community. Granted, it's never passed. And you're right. They use intelligence a lot in that measure. And talking to Rounds, he tells us that AskaPole UAPs, he's like, yeah, that term was carefully debated and we chose it for a reason.
Non-human intelligence, as opposed to like extraterrestrial or something.
Yeah. And so there's a there to some of those people who were part of that measure. I think to others, there's no there. And it's just them kind of feeding the crowd. And they're like, okay, there's a lot of sharks in the water. Let's just throw some fish in there. Well, guess what? When you throw fish into sharks in the water, there's a lot of blood and then more sharks come. So I think he might have like played with fire and totally mixed metaphors with fire and water.
Fire blood.
Like, yeah. So it seems like, I don't know. I'm keeping on it. I think the game changer this go round with the NDAA is that we no longer have House Intel Chair Mike Turner. And
and several people have pointed out that Mike Turner gets almost all of his campaign funding from aerospace defense contractors. He like represents the Wright-Patterson district. Like he's a reasonable guess for somebody who might have stood in front of this and said, no, we're taking out all this eminent domain language, all this stuff about, reverting ownership of non-human technology to the US government. That's gone mysteriously. A philosophy professor I really like, friend of the pod, Stephen Brown, pointed out that if there was nothing there, then there would be no reason to take out any of this language. Like if you didn't have a problem, if there were no non-human technology, then you just wouldn't have to bother obstructing this bill or changing it in any way, because it just wouldn't matter. So the mere fact that somebody did got those provisions is smoke, if not fire.
No, and that's interesting, especially I studied philosophy in my undergrad.
Me too, a little bit.
Freaking nerd. But God bless you, Heidegger and Gadamer. Philosophical hermeneutics was my jam.
Nice.
Well, so we also can't forget that politicians are not themselves people. I don't know what politicians are, but they're just different creatures. And so that's where this issue especially, like I could see Schumer going into it just keeping his promise to his friend, Harry Reid. And Reid, he's from Vegas, so he's probably sitting on, tens of millions of dollars in money he buried in the desert, which his kids are like using to F with Schumer if he breaks his promise, But
why gut it? Like, why would somebody, like, you could see Schumer doing that as an act of friendship, but then why take out the provisions about the eminent domain and stuff?
Well, no. Well, so my question is, why did Schumer allow this measure to be gutted? So I kind of flip it just a little bit. But the reason I do that is because he's the Senate motherfucking, at that time, he was the majority
leader. Yeah.
Like, you don't come and gut the majority leader's bill to his face. And that's where it happened in secret. But again, it happened in secret. So it could have been him. I don't believe that. But I want to keep saying that so that his office comes and tells me, why do you keep saying that, Laslo? It wasn't us. They haven't done that yet. So I'm going to keep floating this until y'all do. Again, it's Washington. It's 5-dimensional chess.
It's very frustrating that we don't even know who took this out. It's like the only thing worse than seeing the sausage get made is not knowing who made the sausage.
And that's the thing. And so that's where these members, and like, it honestly wasn't until Turner got booted by Trump, basically, when Turner got booted as chair of House Intel. Once that happened, Jim Himes, who I've covered for a decade plus. Like, I know a lot of the families and survivors of the Newtown massacre because I was the correspondent for Connecticut Public Radio.
And Jim Himes is
SHU and
Democrat from Connecticut.
He's a Connecticut congressman. And so, like, I've known him from before he was even in Congress. And so, like, he's one of the few powerful members who I can, like, text, and he's responsive.
Cool.
So he doesn't.
Rick Crawford, we're just saying this name for people, is the new House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence chair. Jim Himes is the ranking minority member.
But it's like, I've not known Himes to bullshit with me. Him and I do have to have come to Jesus conversation because for the past year, and again, because I've known him so much, I asked him numerous times. I think he's probably the third. He's like top 5 or at least top 10 people we've had on, members of Congress we've had on most for AskaPole.com. Just because I know him and I know he's skeptical and so dubious of this issue. Or I knew that because literally he told us at AskaPole, UAPs.com, he told us for more than a year that they don't talk about UAPs, doesn't come up, blah, 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 in Turner's committee. Once Turner was gone, what did Himes? Like, look at our latest exclusive with Himes at AskaPole UAPs. He's literally like, hey, yeah, UAP stuff comes up a lot. It was literally a night and day change.
Suddenly, I always took Grush seriously.
Yeah, and literally, that's what he said. And he's like, we've looked into it. And so that's what I'm still fishing around for. Like, where did that change come from? And it kind of feels to me like Turner had a blanket, we don't talk UAPs publicly. We just don't talk about them. Because we've kind of had the same thing from Andre Carson, the number 2 most powerful Democrat. He's right behind Himes. So he's going to take over once Himes is gone. And Andre Carson, he's always interesting on this issue and like treads very lightly. He was actually the one who chaired the first hearing in 50 years back in 2022.
Okay.
And so he really wants a seat at the table. And he's told me, like, hey, if there's a select UAP committee, I want to either be the chair, or if Democrats are in the minority, I want to be the ranking member.
Yeah.
The issue's on his radar. But again, he wouldn't, and he still kind of doesn't, but he wouldn't talk about it under the Turner regime. So there's kind of been a change there. So part of me does wonder. And like, what, Turner's way out of power. So I'll give you this, which is not public. Turner was actually primaried by someone from the UAP community, UFO community.
Really?
And he just like dismissed them as just like a nut job. So I think he always kept himself away from the issue because one, Wright Patterson, all that, but two, he got electoral headaches from the UAP community. So he just won't even effing talk about it.
Interesting.
Which it took me 10 times hounding him in a nice Midwestern way. Hey, sir, how are you? Hey, you still not talking to the press? Saw you on Fox News last night. You did great, sir. So I slowly broke him down. And then he wouldn't talk to me on the record, but he's like, hey, let me tell you this. And that's where he's like, kind of divulged to me that he doesn't want to wade into this issue publicly, even though it's definitely was on his mind. And at that moment, it was top of his mind.
Interesting.
And so, but Turner's a slimy son of a bitch. And I know that because I used to cover him for Dayton, Ohio's NPR station. And he used to do interviews with me. And he used to be in shabbier suits. Now he's in these nice, pristine, form-fitted suits. He's worth a lot more money than he was a decade or so ago. And, I don't do hallway interviews. Or what did he tell us at AskaPole? He said, I don't do these ambush interviews. Sir, there's nothing ambush about me merely asking your opinion or your thoughts on big national security issues. And if you want to laugh them off, cool, do it. Or say, there's no national security concern here. Like, you're the head of the Intel committee.
Yeah.
But no, he just goes on the friendly confines of Fox and OAN and those, and that's his safe space, his little, like, warm blankie. Well, guess what, sir? Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump took away your blankie. So now you're just floating out there alone. He's probably going to retire and you get a nice 6-figure, 7-figure contractor check. And so I'm waiting on this go round for the NDAA to see if the clog is just naturally gone now that Hunter's gone.
Hunter. Yeah, or if there are other defense contractor reps who are going to muddy the waters.
Well, so the other thing at the start of those negotiations for the past two NDAAs, we kind of had, for the first time ever, we had House Republicans, and I hate to get partisan, but this got partisan. And NDAA, again, that's the National Defense Authorization Act. So it doesn't fund, it's not an appropriation for our military, but the U.S. military ceases, technically. We've never actually had it, but if that bill does not pass, then technically U.S. military is not authorized, and boom, they cease. That's also why that bill gets larded up with so much BS from every different contractor, every different niche thing.
Because it's a must pass. Big, so it will go through. If you get into the train, you will cross the border.
And that's how they screw over all of us, the American people and the world. But so that's what I'm very curious to see what happens this go round. It could just naturally be a whole new day, or we might have the defense contractors who use Turner as their pawn now ponying up a lot of money to another person on there, person on there. And
I have a pitch for you actually to this point from Nick Gold. Maybe you bumped into this guy, the Declassify UAP.
What's up, Nick?
Dude. All right. Nick had a cool idea about this particular part of the bill, which is that we should be thinking about the defense contractors as stakeholders. And if we're going to include language like eminent domain, like the US government exerts eminent domain over this material, then you need a subclause like, but you get to continue profiting from it, or, maintaining it, or whatever. You have some ownership of it. So yeah, there might be like a question you could potentially formulate in there about like whether you've considered giving these defense contractors ongoing rights to any materials they might already have in their possession.
Well, no, and that's actually a beautiful framing, because I can't ask him like, hey, this classified topic, talk about it.
Is it real?
And that's where phrasing it like that and coming at it from outside of, or just coming at it from different angles is necessary to dislodge. And I think you asked it like a minute or 5 ago, but maybe it was 15 minutes ago. But like the problem with this issue is it's classified.
Yeah.
And so like no members of Congress should really be talking to me at AskaPol UAPs.com. The fact that they are is like amazing. Don't tell them they shouldn't. But that's where like I love it. Because my job is like trying to dislodge them from something that if they talk about too much, they can literally go to jail for. But I think that's where we're seeing some of those bonds of old kind of be broken. And again, that's because the American people, that's because they're feeling that pressure. One, because of new videos and everything with our phones. But two, people are just like, wait, this thing's over my house. You don't know what it is?
Yeah.
And so like
maybe someone could just find out for me, please.
Yeah. And so we'll see. The one thing I am just constantly doing, and so this happened last NDAA. And it's cool on one level and it breaks my heart on another level. Like I constantly am just breaking news to senators. Like no U.S. senators knew that David Grush was hired by the House. Me slowly going and telling these senators, like I haven't even seen Gillibrand. I think she's been avoiding me very well this Congress. I found her once or twice. But they've been kind of avoiding me. And so like I haven't been able to tell her. I think that's going to kind of blow her mind. And she's going to kind of work with the Secrets Task Force because she's been trying to meet with Grush, or so she's told me. It just didn't work out last year, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm very curious to see how this Congress gets its groove with this issue. And like when it comes to the NDAA, last year, 2024, the Congressional UAP Caucus learned about the UAPDA being introduced in the Senate NDAA through me, through AskaPole UAPs.
Oh
the
my
House
God.
members didn't. And so that's where like I'm always reminding folks, like the swamp is worse than you imagine. And so like I'm like,
and the media environment is like really thin on this shit, which is why it's so important and valuable that you're out there doing what you're doing, because they're not seeing it in their feed from like WAPO or New York Times. Like it's just not coming to them. So they're not imbibing it. I have actually along this like pitch line while I'm sending ideas your way. I have one other one that I think might be a cool, different avenue for you to explore, and did a little research, and there were some. Oh, this was all new names over here. I was hoping for a crossover with the UAP caucus. I didn't find anybody. Basically, I've been talking to a bunch of scientists about this stuff, and one of the things they often say is like, we can't get funding for this. So they're like, we're working on our dark matter, and we have funding for that because the NSF, the National Science Foundation, officially recognizes dark matter, dark energy as like an area of astrophysical interest. So there are funds allocated for this. So something I've written my congressman about is, can you please instruct in some way the National Science Foundation to create a lane basically for scientists to request funding. I've had a couple scientists tell me I can't just ask the NSF for funding for my UAP projects. They have to create a category at the NSF of funding for UAP projects.
Interesting.
And so I looked this up, and per ChatGPT, the committees that do oversee NSF funding are the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and the House and Senate Appropriations Subcommittees on Commerce, Justice, Science, and related agencies. Kind of, ridiculous hodgepodge grab bags. But those are the four committees that have some overlap with the NSF. What were you going to?
Oh, I know them well.
Oh, you do? Oh, great.
Mr. Teddy, especially Mr. Teddy Cruz. He's the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee these days.
Okay, so you're familiar with these dudes anyway. I looked and I didn't find any crossovers between these senators and House members and the UAP caucus team. So this is kind of blue ocean, and probably a bunch of these people would be totally new to the question. But I was going to pitch you basically asking some of them, have you considered
what I do?
Funding?
That's what I do.
Great. Well, this would be my one ask for you. Can you ask some of these guys about instructing the NSF to fund UAP projects explicitly? Because other than the military disclosing a bunch of this, the only thing that's going to pressure us to get more information is scientists making breakthrough discoveries. And they're out there, they're ready to do it, but they don't have the money. Thank you for listening.
Well, no. That's like literally what we do at AskaPol. Literally send us your questions and I just go and ask them. And yeah, sometimes they're duds. Sometimes they get knocked off as rumors. I think that's really good for us to like get rid of a lot of rumors in this space, so that we can all slowly start to talk about the same thing, whatever that is. Or the same things.
Whatever. Refine the information environment, clarify the waters.
Right. And like my curiosity here, because like I haven't even started like branching out to the energy committees, because there's the suspicion, well, obviously Pentagon, but then there's military contractors. Well, then there's Department of Energy.
Yeah.
And that like it could, and this is where I meant to say this earlier, but you have all these silos within the Pentagon. The Pentagon is, I think, it's the biggest building on the planet per square feet. It's a silo with silos on silos on silos.
Literally millions of employees. They use this phrase stovepiping about all the different regions and areas not talking to each other.
And like, if you remember Arrow, which was, was the little kid, infant on the block, Arrow is only going to be as good as the top brass allows it to be, because the Arrow is a part of the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's been interesting to me seeing Congress put so much hope in Arrow, where I'm like, guys, unless you do changes up at the top and dislodge their old school thinking that these are the Pentagon's secrets and they're ours, if they are holding on to those secrets, which Congress doesn't even know, it's like Arrow is only going to be as useful as it's allowed to be from the top.
A journalistic thing that drives me crazy is that Sue Goff tells the journalists, Arrow has not found any evidence that any of David Grush's allegations are true. And then journalists report this by saying the Pentagon denies these allegations, which is a totally different statement. The Pentagon top brass has not said shit about David Grush's allegations. It's only ever been Sue Goff and Arrow.
And then also, if we're laying it on the media, political comms professor Laslo needs to get a couple digs in on my colleagues.
Great. Throw some elbows.
But like, no, we are the worst. Like, literally, what did Arrow do when the last report came out? They did brilliant comm strategy. They went to CNN, and CNN got a little scoopage. And so CNN actually had a 4 or 5 minute segment on the issue, which is mind blowing. But what did they do? They just carried Arrow's talking points, flimsy as they were, holes in the bags, but like water's dripping everywhere. But CNN's like, look what we got a bag. And they're like, Arrow is just proven 500 of these objects. Nobody cares about the 500 that they know. That's not what we're talking about.
No, the question is, what about the 12? 50? Yeah, the 50, the 18.
The 50, and I think it's like, at one point it was like 200, 250. But like their comm strategy has been so brilliant. Pardon me. It's been such a lazy comm strategy that has worked so perfectly on my lazy, terrible MSM colleagues. Because we just take the Kool-Aid we're given from the government, whether it's war on drugs and like how we've helped perpetuate this opioid epidemic, where we're like, like what? A couple of years ago, I heard Jake Tapper, and then he got Sanjay Gupta to agree with him, being like, hey, this fentanyl stuff is so bad. I just tell my kids, don't even do it. Like, don't even risk doing a drug because it might have fentanyl in it. Like, don't smoke that reefer. There might be some fentanyl in there, and then you could die. Jake, what are you saying there? You're literally repackaging just say no. No. What do we do in 2025? If you care about your kids and you're a human with a brain, you give them fentanyl test strips. You also give them Narcan and naloxone, both of which my bureau, the LCB, offers for free.
Wow.
At the LCB library in the U.S. Capitol.
Wow. Those are overdose emergency drugs. Is that right?
Dude, half the fucking press corps is fucking high as a kite half the time.
Wow.
This is how do you think you survived the campaign trail in 20-hour days?
Okay, yeah.
Go skiing. Don't recommend it, but as a former cokehead, if you've got any questions about drugs, come Professor Laslo's
You know
way.
how to do it, healthfully to the extent that's possible.
Yeah, but I mean, and so that's where like the media, we carry so much of the blame because what happened after all those classified briefings when U.S. airspace was invaded by a Chinese balloon and then 3 other objects, blah, blah, blah. Media covered it when there was, the outcry from the public. And then we just slowly went on to like the next shiny object.
They just don't, yeah.
Our lack of memory, our lack of just
curiosity.
No curiosity. And literally, that's the fault of Congress. Most of Congress isn't curious enough. And there's like, even members of the UAP caucus, they're like, FAA, they approved all this stuff hovering over the president's golf course, munitions depots in Jersey. And it's just like, no, we're all like lulling ourselves into this like gentle sleep of convenience.
Yeah.
It's like,
it is convenient. It's low energy, I think, is the thing. It doesn't require activation. It doesn't require a lot of work. And so it's just easier to be less curious.
Low energy. Don't say that around Sleepy Marco. Them's fighting words.
Interesting. Okay, I want to ask just a couple more things. One is, imagine 5 years from now, disclosure happened. What do you think would have had to be true for that to go down? Like if you woke up out of a cryo sleep and somebody said they disclosed it, UAP are real, what would you imagine went into that process that resulted in transparency?
Don't forget, I'm new media. Like these days, I think we could have a spaceship, Independence Day style, come down here to Earth.
Okay, a straight up undeniable sighting, like in a public place.
And half the people would just be like going about their day.
I see. You're saying that even that might not be.
I'm going deeper and more cynical. But I'm like, and then the other half, so a quarter and a quarter would be like, look, see, I told you. And then the other half would be like, you idiot. Like, why are you looking up? Like, sorry, that satire movie, Don't Look Up, it's really freaking on point. Yeah, I think we'll see. Hopefully I'm around in 5 years, but I've abused my body fairly well, so I'm not banking on that.
You look great. You'll be fine. So one way I could imagine it going down would be that like the scientific community gets interested enough and we pass like a threshold where we start talking about this like in the way we talk about like cosmic rays or quasars, like, oh yeah, no, there is something here that we're just like in a slow process of defining it more. And then at that like gradually warms everybody up to the idea. And then we get a little bit more information from the Pentagon or the White House, just because they have to address something that everybody has collectively agreed is a real thing. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Sure. I've got one for you. I think we know disclosure when Mitch McConnell rips off that mask. Wait, too soon? Too soon?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, he's got enough extra folds on there.
Yeah, but like to be a little more serious, I cover Congress. I don't think, and people say this all the time, like, oh, the answer's not going to come from Congress. true, but Congress has the power because they represent you, and they do it really poorly these days, but they're still your elected representatives, and there's a power there. And I think, like, if they stop pressing, as disjointed as the Secrets Task Force UAP caucus has been, this issue has become more mainstream. But it's like, I'd say it's almost mainstream.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at polls, 70% of the American people are almost like over the issue. They're just like, of course there's life out there. Of course they've been here. Like,
out there, yes. Been here, I think, is not yet majority. The military knowing more, that's a strong majority. People say like 70, 80% people think that the military knows more than they're telling. But only like half of Americans think, yeah, probably some kind of aliens or fewer. There's not a ton of great polling on this. Like,
and like all that makes sense. And like, that's where the American people are like, they're brilliant in their living their daily lives, because
they're listening.
My farmer buddies in Iowa, sure, they might think about this issue a couple times a year when they're working 24-hour days out in their combine, the fields.
I mean, people don't even think about politics. Understandably, they're busy. People have lives.
And actually, any of you, and that's kind of why I created AskaPole. Like, I'm going after the unnewsed. I want the people who Washington laughs at your issues. I'm not like, no, come with me. Cool. I know Congress. And even though they laugh in my face, I still love to ask them. And, sometimes it can be a little embarrassing because you get powerful lawmakers mocking you, rolling their eyes at you. But no. You guys are in power, and you're allowing Langley Air Force Base with our stealth fighter fleet 30 minutes from Washington, D.C., so a part of the protective unit for the president and Congress. You're allowing their airspace to be invaded to the point that our fifth-generation fighter jets are shut down for 17 days. Like, no. You can't laugh at me, because shame on you. And that's where shame on this Congress. Because whatever is going on, the American public gets it, because when these incursions happen in different states, which we've seen in California, Montana, Arizona, Virginia, Florida, and we can probably keep going and name all 50 of them. But the American people get it, that there's something there. And maybe Senator Kelly is right. Maybe it is foreign adversaries. Well, then wake the F up, Congress. What are you doing? Laughing off these issues. Oh, when you call it UAP, we laugh it off. You guys are just now starting to have UAS hearings. And like, who? Congressman Timmons, who's a member of the South Carolina Air National Guard. Amazing. Like, I would never go into battle, but if I had to, I would be way in back of him, because he's going to kill some shit. So I trust him as a soldier, as like a congressman. Like, he's just a no shit person. And what did he do? He just had a hearing, I think end of April, maybe mid-April. He had a hearing on unmanned aerial systems or whatever. Interviewing him afterwards, what did he say? He goes, yeah, we're going to keep up on this topic. We might have a hearing on it next year. What are you, like, bro? What did you learn in that hearing? Literally, we don't have control of American airspace, but I know that the schedule's full of all this other stuff. So you're probably maybe going to keep on this with a hearing
next year.
Next year.
Well, so to this point, what can people do to help you out? Like, we'll land on where they can go one more time to subscribe to you. But what should people who care about this subject and who are for some reason still listening to us talk about it 2 hours in, what should they do? What should they do to talk to their elected representatives? What do you need from them to spur better action?
Well, this is actually interesting. It's kind of the first time I've thought of it, and my colleagues in the press corps are going to hate it. But I think the community's been doing pretty well of applying pressure to like the usual suspects, you know, Congresswoman Luna, Burleson, Burchett, blah, blah, blah. They've heard from this community a million times, and they probably need to hear a million more times from y'all. So like, don't stop that. But I think that's where folks can like think out of the box a little bit. And I always remind, like, I have a new batch of 3 interns coming next week. Some program feeds them to me each summer. And what I always tell them, because I'm on the board at the Regional Reporters Association, is like, hey, I'm way overworked and underpaid as is. I don't really have time to babysit you all, but I want you to get clips. And so if you're from Florida, or pardon me, if you're from Chicago and your grandma lives in Florida and you've got an aunt and uncle in Georgia, that naturally gives you 3 different states, regions where you have a natural connection to. So like you want original clips coming here, you know, what's a clip? You know, a piece of work that you did that you can show an editor. Hey, I did this when I was in DC. So I'm like, hey, to get your clips, to write those original stories, think out of the box and like hit up every space, every region that you have a little connection to, like a great aunt that you haven't like talked to in 10 years, whatever. She's in Washington State. Boom. Hit up those publications too, because you just want to find an in and boom, then you can maybe get that clip. And like what? When I graduated 19 years ago or whatever, I sent out like 115 resumes, heard back from 5, interviews with 3, hired by 1 for a 6-month unpaid internship here in DC, and haven't looked back since.
Nice.
So that's where like, instead of just, and especially like, yeah, I curse a lot online. My grandma's taught me how to curse, my Midwestern grandmas, but maybe don't curse at the lawmakers who are your allies so much. Still apply that pressure, but maybe don't curse at them. Because like I've been trying to get Jim Himes, you know, top Democrat on the House UAP committee. Every once in a while, he'll come on social media and interact with the, you know, UFO acts, etc. But he's dubious of it, and I'm trying to like break him down and be like, hey, come and do a live session with us, because you're going to find these people are a lot more thoughtful. You know, like what you see online is sometimes the worst of this community. And so that's where y'all should police yourselves. If you see someone, you know, anyone using the C word, no. Like, I will backhand you. Like, no, we don't use that language. You know, and so like, don't call a female congresswoman the B word, because literally their office is just going to block you. And like, if you just want to be blocked, if you just want to be disruptive, then what the fuck are you doing with your life? Like, literally, you're a loser. Like, come on. You know, if you want answers and care about the issue, I think we're at this kind of beautiful precipice where like y'all have a decision to make. And I think the decision's in Congress's hands, but the power's in your hands. And so I think you guys can get a lot more lawmakers, get this administration even. Because what does President Donald Trump love more than anything? Hearing praise. So if y'all just effusively praise Donald Trump and say, thank you for all the transparency you've done on the UAP issue, we still have more questions. The guy can't avoid a compliment or a group like, who? JFK, or pardon me, RFK. Like, stab that dude. Rubio, stab that dude. But once they started praising Trump, he's like, I don't care about the scars you gave me. Now you call me king. Cool. You know,
interesting.
So that's where like
catch more flies with honey approach there.
Yeah. So y'all play some politics with it, you know, and play 5-dimensional chess. Again, like, I don't think the answers are going to come from Congress, but I don't think the answers are going to ever come if Congress lays back down. And Congress has been laying down for 50, 70, some odd years. Congress finally woke up. And like, we still get the eye rolls from the Mark Warners, them of the world, but those eye rolls are temporary. And I think y'all pressing for answers is something permanent because those lawmakers feel it. And like, honestly, the second Turner was out, Jim Himes ran up to me because he had a message to our subscribers to AskaPol. And he was like, hey, just want your people to know, yeah, like y'all are heard a lot more than I am and my colleagues, and for good freaking reason.
Great place to land. People should get out there, reach out more, reach out politely, reach out positively, and people should engage with your work.
Put them in their asses when they need it, but do it a little gently.
Sure. Pressure, attention, focus. That's important. I strongly recommend that people go to AskaPole.com and sign up to support Matt. You can contribute questions directly, but you also will just empower this person who's on this really great mission. Thank you so much for your energy and intensity around this, Matt. And we wish you all the best in your next 19 years in DC.
Something like that. I'm aiming for 4.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. You got a plan.
Earlier you said 5, and I was like, oh, 5 years. I think I'm dead by then.
Sounds like a lot. Are you going to go back to the Midwest, you think, or stick around in the East?
Dude, I've been here 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on a book for my 20th year anniversary.
Nice.
And then we'll see. I'm possibly wed here for life, but I also know this spot is like the swamp is killing me slowly. So we'll see how much of a masochist I am.
Nice. Well, we'll look forward to your book. Maybe we can talk to you when that comes out in a year or whenever it does. Thank you so much again for sharing your time with us today, man. And
dude, this was awesome.
Keep up the good work.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.